What state does function according to what you call the minimal levels of honesty? Is there a state?
None.
None.
States are power centers. The only thing that imposes constraints on them is either outside force or their own populations. So the United States...
Internal criticism,
yes,
critical dialogue.
That's exactly why the intellectuals who we're talking about are so adamant at preventing people in the United States and Britain from learning the most elementary facts about themselves.
But is it even possible then? If you say no state functions,
it's not only possible, it happens. The United States, for example, is far more civilized than it was 40 years ago. Let's just take that. This March happened to be the 40th anniversary of the public announcement by the Kennedy administration that the U.S. Air Force is bombing South Vietnam. It also initiated chemical warfare to destroy crops, initiated napalm, started driving millions of people into concentration camps to separate them from the guerrillas who they knew they were supporting. This was all public. Did we commemorate the 40th anniversary? No. Why? Because 40 years ago, nobody cared. If the government announces, okay, we're going to start bombing another country and use chemical warfare to wipe out their crops and drive them to concentration camps, fine, not a problem. So there was no protest and no discussion.
But now there's more protest and discussion.
Yes, because the country has gotten more civilized. No U.S. president today, or for the last 20 years, could conceivably do what Kennedy could do with total impunity 40 years ago. And the reason is because there was massive popular protest opposed by the intellectual classes, of course, who hate it. But it led to all sorts of things, including opposition to aggression and violence. It also spawned the contemporary civil rights movement, the feminist movement, the environmental movements, and all sorts of other things. And it imposed important constraints on straight violence. In fact, that's how we got rid of slavery. That's how we got rid of feudalism. That's how every step of...
So are we moving towards an emancipation from these things?
Slowly.
You're optimistic?
Yes. Over time, there has been agonizingly slow progress, but very real, always opposed by the intellectuals who support violence and atrocities and try to justify them and try to prevent the population from knowing about them. But fortunately, their control is limited, and therefore
what will the state look like at the end?
At the end?
Yeah.
The end is a long time.
Okay,
but
I mean, what would we look like?
At the end, I think states ought to dissolve, because I think they're illegitimate structures. But that's a long time.
That's it.
But
it is the end of the nation state that you foresee in the vision.
I don't foresee anything. What I'm saying is that as long as people, ordinary people, are able to free themselves from the doctrinal controls imposed on them by their self-appointed betters and mentors, as long as they're able to do this, they'll continue to be able to struggle for peace and justice and freedom and limitations on violence and constraints on power, as they've been doing for hundreds of years, and I don't see any end to that. Where it'll end up in the long run, I can tell you where I'd like it to, but I wouldn't even dream about that. The immediate problem is to free ourselves from the shackles imposed very consciously by the kind of people you're talking about, who don't want the facts to be known, and for very good reasons, because if people know the facts, they're not going to tolerate them. So therefore you have to prevent them from knowing. You have to indoctrinate them. You have to tell them stories about how we're really good guys, and if we use violence, it must be for the general good because we represent the course of history. Yeah, that's the job of propagandists for power and violence. And it's the task of populations to free themselves from those kinds of controls and domination.